Hopefully it works. All right, so I'm Tess Geers, and I'm a wild fisheries specialist at the New England Aquarium in Boston, Massachusetts, in the US. And I'm going to be switching gears a little bit with this presentation and talking about how we use environmental risk assessments to inform large-scale seafood sourcing through partnerships with business. So just a quick outline, I'll give a little background about the New England Aquarium and our sustainable seafood program. And then the bulk of the talk really is going to be about the tools that we use for giving information on sustainable seafood. And we have tools for both wild fisheries and aquaculture. I'm just going to be focusing on wild fisheries today. But if you have questions later about the aquaculture portion, I'll be happy to answer those. And then at the end, I'll talk about how we communicate our results to businesses and really how we focus on providing actionable and realistic recommendations, and then the other considerations that we think about in providing those results and recommendations. So as I said, I'm at the New England Aquarium, which is in Boston, Massachusetts, on the northeast coast of the US. We opened in 1969. We're a fairly large aquarium. We have about over 250 staff and 1.25 million visitors a year. Outside of just the normal sort of exhibits, we have conservation, research, and education programs. And all of those programs are really active in research and science, and we produce a number of peer-reviewed publications in the aquarium community. So a question we often get asked, and this may be more obvious to this audience, but why do we at the aquarium have a sustainable seafood program? We're within our conservation department, and the overall mission of the aquarium really is to protect the blue planet, to protect the ocean, and protect ocean health. And as we all know, one of the biggest impacts that we have as humans on the ocean is what we take out of it through fishing and also through coastal development and aquaculture. So the mission of our program really does fit in with the overall mission of the aquarium to protect the ocean's health. So as I said, the specific goals of or mission of the aquarium seafood program is to protect the world's ocean resources by raising public awareness and working with the seafood industry to advance sustainable practices in wild capture fisheries and aquaculture. And our specific program goals are to educate and inform corporations and the public about sustainable seafood. And by doing that, we hope to harness the power of the market to really drive improvements on the water and drive change in the water. And in order to do this, we've identified, created, and distributed tools and information to advance sustainable seafood. And then we also cultivate ambassadors to take action on these issues. So the way that we achieve these goals is mainly through partnerships with major seafood buyers. So we work with retailers such as Ahold USA and the Fresh Market, which are supermarkets all over the US, and also with value-added manufacturers and distributors such as Seaport and Gorton's, and then large restaurant and hotel chains. So we work with Darden Restaurant Group, used to be well known for owning Red Lobster, which they just sold, and Starwood Hotels and Resorts that owns the Westin and Sheraton hotels. And this model of NGOs partnering with the seafood industry was really pioneered through our program and through our initial partnership with Ahold USA back in 2001. We also work with colleagues in the NGO community that also work on sustainable seafood, and we're a founding member of the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions, which is made up of 18 NGOs in North America, and Canada, and the US. And we have developed this common vision for sustainable seafood that we use to help inform our business partners. So now I'll get into the bulk of this presentation and how we really, how we do this, how we inform these corporate partners. So we've developed something that we call our decision ranking tool. It's a unique methodology that was developed by our staff at the aquarium. As I said, we have tools for wild capture fisheries and for aquaculture. And so these tools, these assessment tools, look at 5 major decision points for wild fisheries and for aquaculture. In wild capture fisheries, which is I'm going to focus on today, we look at stock health, fisheries management, endangered, threatened, and protected species bycatch, habitat impacts, and then bycatch of target and non-target species. And within each of these sort of overall impact areas, overall decision points, we have sub-criteria that we look at as well in questions. And each of these decision points are ranked and evaluated. So we look, they're ranked according to whether we consider them best available to minimal. So best available is going to be the best practices that are out there, or the least environmental impact. Minimal is sort of a minimal threshold of impact. And if it doesn't reach that minimum bar, then it gets cut to a do not buy recommendation. But that's really in the most extreme cases. So just to give you an example for one decision point for wild fisheries stock status, how we would look at that. So for best available, that would be if the biomass is above the target reference point. Satisfactory, if it's between the target and the limit reference point, and there's management in place to keep it there, or at least keep it above the limit. And minimal would be if it's below the limit, but there is management in place to make sure that it's not continuing to decline. And for do not buy, this would be if the biomass is below the limit reference point, but there's no management in place and rebuilding is not occurring. And we consider that not acceptable at any level. So, okay, so that's kind of the general framework for each decision point. And how we evaluate all of those 5 decision points together is we put them in this hierarchical table. And so we have, there's greater weighting for the stock management, or stock health and fisheries management. So we actually look at those at the top together with equal weight. And then we go down through the table and look at endangered, threatened, and protected species bycatch, habitat impacts, and target and non-target bycatch. And so this matrix is a, as I said, there's going to be sub-decision points within each of those. And so each of those little boxes that you see here is a sub-criteria that we go through and evaluate. So I'm going to give an example for the stock health of the nested table that we use to look at the different criteria for stock health. So don't worry if you can't read that, I'm going to go through each of these. But so the main questions that we ask related to stock health are what the stock status is, again what the biomass is relative to reference points. We then look at the harvest rate and whether overfishing is occurring or not. And then we look at the stock assessment itself and how reliable the information is. So there are actually sub-criteria within that. So for the stock assessment, we look at how robust the data is going into the stock assessment, whether how long the time series are, what types of information are being used, if there's a lot of good information on life history, if that's included, that kind of thing. We look at the frequency of the assessments and relative to how long-lived the species is. We look at model uncertainty, and I think this is interesting in the context of this meeting. It's kind of a small component, but it's really important when I'm looking at a stock assessment to see whether the uncertainty is communicated and whether it's explicitly accounted for. And then also whether there's a stock assessment review process is something that we consider. So that was obviously in the context of if there is a stock assessment and if there are reference points available, but that, as we all know, doesn't happen in all cases, and especially in a lot of the fisheries that we have to evaluate in the southern hemisphere in particular. So we have sort of an alternative way of evaluating the same points if there isn't a stock assessment, if there aren't reference points. And to take sort of a precautionary approach here, we consider that if there isn't, if it's data deficient, it will not get a best available rating, so it can only get a satisfactory or a minimal rating, or do not buy. So to look at stock status from this perspective, we look on what the available time series data are. So we'll look at if there's catch per unit effort data, that's great. If not, then we'll just have to look at catch information to sort of determine the stock status. For the harvest rate, we look at the likelihood of overfishing based on effort, life history, and management. And then for the data robustness, just what type of information we use to evaluate the stock status. So to show quickly how this goes through the whole decision ranking tool, I'm going to give an example of two different fisheries. So this is going to be comparing two different yellowfin tuna fisheries. So this is the Maldives pole and line fishery. And for stock health, it came out as best available. There's no overfishing occurring and it's not overfished. And then looking at this Costa Rica longline fishery for yellowfin, although the stock status is technically the same, it's not overfished, overfishing is not occurring, we ranked it lower because the stock assessment is highly uncertain. Management is more or less the same for these two fisheries, so they're rated the same there. Then looking at endangered, threatened, and protected species bycatch, this Maldives pole and line fishery doesn't have a lot of endangered species bycatch, or doesn't have any really. And then the longline fishery does have a lot of sea turtle bycatch, so that comes out as minimal over here. Looking at habitat impacts, again, both of these actually come out as best available because they're pelagic fisheries and they don't really have much impact on habitat. And then for target and non-target bycatch, so that's looking at juvenile bycatch and bycatch of other species. This comes out kind of in the middle. There's a little bit of juvenile bycatch in the pole and line fishery. And then this comes out as minimal. There's quite a lot of shark and other large pelagic bycatch in the longline fishery. Okay, so when we're making our recommendations to our business partners, this table is way too confusing. And so we basically take this and we get rid of all the arrows and we kind of flip it on its side. So that's what this next one is showing. So up here at the top, this is the same thing. It's best available, and down here is do not buy. And so we're comparing these, the two yellowfin tuna that I just showed, the Maldives and the Costa Rica, as well as several other yellowfin tuna species here, or stocks. And in making our recommendations, what we do is we try and ask the corporations to promote the ones that are sort of up here at the top and not sourced here. But anything in the middle, we really encourage them to work through their supply chain and work with the fisheries to make the improvements on the water so that these ones that are down here at the bottom can really move up and become better sources for them. And just as a quick note, the way that our tool works, we only compare similar species and similar products. So again, in this, we're just comparing yellowfin tuna. We would not compare like a whitefish to a tuna because for business partners and even for consumers, they're not really making a decision about whether they're going to buy whitefish or whether they're going to buy tuna. They're going to buy both. So we're looking just at the different stocks within those and the different fisheries within that. And then quickly, just, this is just looking at environmental risk. We recognize that there are other areas of risks, the social and economic impacts. We don't have expertise in that, but if we come across those issues in our research, we certainly highlight those for our business partners. And as well, we also incorporate other sort of issues that we haven't explicitly accounted for in the decision ranking tool, so climate change. And we are also considering adding some information on forage fish management and short-lived species. So with that, I'll take your questions. Thank you.